building behind me, 104 Pall Mall in London, is called the Reform Club. The Reform Club was founded in 1836 by Edward Ellis. He was an MP for Coventry, the founder of the Reform Club, and the director of the Hudson Bay Company. The Hudson Bay Company was founded in 1670 by royal charter. The Hudson Bay Company was a colonial enterprise. This charter granted a trade monopoly to the holder. It operated primarily as a fur trading corporation, but it had its own forts, its own ships, its own internal legal system, and it acted as the administrative arm of British imperial power. Edward Ellis inherited his capital position and monopoly power. In 1765, his grandfather Alexander Ellis set up the firm Finn, Ellis and Company and entered the fur trade. That company expanded quickly by supplying British military posts. His biggest clients were James McGill and Simon McTavish. They ran the North West Company. The North West Company was the dominant Canadian fur exporter and the biggest rival of the Hudson Bay Company. He invested in both, and by 1777 he was the single largest merchant investor in the Canadian fur trade. In 1804, him and his son Edward attempted to take over the Hudson Bay Company with British taxpayer money, offering them £100,000 in exchequer bills to buy the Hudson Bay Company outright. At that point they say no, but it isn't the last time that this family tried to move on this company. In the meantime, he continues to acquire land at colonial scale. He secures a royal patent for 40,000 acres near Copperstown in Lower Canada. He also buys himself the Seigneurie of Beauharnois, which is the lordship of this vast feudal estate, and he invests heavily in New York mortgages. By the time he dies in 1805, his fortune is over £500,000. In today's money, that's about £1 billion. His son Edward inherits all of that. He was known as the Bear. Apparently that nickname is for his commercial ferocity, but also his line of business was fur. His inheritance also included his father's slave plantations in the West Indies. Edward Ellis owned hundreds of enslaved workers in sugar plantations across the Caribbean. When Parliament passed the Slavery Abolition Act, and the British government paid £20 million in compensation to slave owners, he was a recipient. In his father's era, the North West Company was a client, a competitor, and a company he had tried to take over multiple times. Edward became a partner in the North West Company, and in 1821 he signed the merger between these two companies. As the director of this new consolidated fur monopoly, he then used his political connections to protect the company's interests in Parliament for decades. When Parliament held a select committee inquiry into the Hudson Bay Company's charter and its governance, Ellis was their key witness, and his influence over how that inquiry was framed is what protected the Hudson Bay Company from accountability. This was a fur trading, slave owning military contractor with a monopoly over Indigenous dispossession in Canada. And he set up the Reform Club. Let's go inside. Welcome to the Reform Club. According to their website, they are a lively social community and a place of outstanding architectural importance. The Reform Club is a reminder of the country's advance towards democracy. It was founded in 1836 for the benefit of those radicals and Whigs pledged to supporting the Great Reform Act. So what was the Reform Act of 1832? First, let's look at how the British state describe it. It says, as the 19th century progressed and the memory of the violence of the French Revolution faded, there was a growing acceptance that some parliamentary reform was necessary. The unequal distribution of seats, the extension of the franchise, and the rotten boroughs were all issues to be addressed. The Tory Prime Minister in 1830, Arthur Wellesley, 1st Duke of Wellington, was resolutely opposed to parliamentary reform. However, there was growing support for limited change within his party, primarily because partially extending the franchise would allow the wealthy and influence of Britain's growing middle class to be exploited. These 4 sentences are enough to demonstrate how the British state constructs official history. It opens with the memory of the French Revolution. That's a great place to start British history. With French violence. Remember the French violence? Nothing about the domestic violence. Immediately we have externalized a threat and framed a British response as calm, measured, rational. It then frames that revolutionary period, which was not only happening in France, as a distant problem to be remembered, something the reasonable statesman, a Tory prime minister, eventually had to accept. But the reality is, all and any concessions from this power structure were extracted under threat of domestic insurrection. There's no need to reference the French Revolution in the opening text of the Reform Act blurb. Less than 2 years before the Reform Act was the Swing Riots, when farm workers across southern England started destroying their machines. Between 1830 and 1832, there was constant riots in Nottingham, Bristol, Derby, Leicestershire, Birmingham and London. When the House of Lords first rejected the Reform Act, there was a run on the Bank of England. And in a couple of days, people withdrew over £1.5 million. And that's in 1831 money. The threat of the French memory. English people were burning the countryside and pulling all of their money out of the machine. But sure, French Revolution. I could do a whole piece just dismantling this copy, but I really want to stay focused on the Reform Club. So anyway, this is bullshit. And this is Thomas Babington Macaulay, and he said the quiet part out loud in 1831. I am opposed to universal suffrage because I think that it would produce a destructive revolution. I support this plan, the Reform Act, because I am sure that it is our best security against a revolution. This is not me interpreting the Reform Act. This is one of the principal architects, in his own words, from Hansard Records. This bill was a prophylactic against democracy, not an expression of it. It only extended voting to property-owning men in the middle class. Basically, as few people as we can give rights to without starting a revolution. The British democracy had to be pried out of the cold, dead hands of the House of Lords. It was not granted civilly, and they have not stopped interfering with it since. The Whigs as a political group were a coalition of aristocratic landowners and industrial manufacturers. Their push for parliamentary reform is inseparable from that manufacturing class's push for free trade. Before 1932, voting in England was a patchwork of local arrangements. How's this for Victorian jargon? Local arrangements included Scot and lot voters, pot wallopers, free men and 40-shilling freeholders. Can we bring that democracy back? The problem is, increasingly in certain boroughs, working men were allowed to vote. And that was causing a problem for the people who wanted the state to serve their economic interests. The Reform Act just standardised everything into a single countrywide qualification. If you owned land worth more than £10, you could vote. You can see the effect of this if you zoom in on any one borough that was an industrial town. Some towns had more working men because they were beside the mines or the railroads. Those are the boroughs that got most reformed. Malden is a great example. Before the Reform Act, the electorate was over 3,000. After it, that drops to 700. I'm running out of time. Go to part 2. We will get to Nigel eventually.